Hi there and welcome. Jonathan here. These talks are offered freely so that no one is ever denied access to these practices. Your support makes a big difference. If you feel inspired to make a donation, please go to jonathanfoust.com. Thank you. Boy, did you catch that motorcycle going by? Wow. Oh my gosh. It'd be very interesting to get a little sampling of our individual reactions to that. Normally mine would be, what a jerk. But I actually was frightened for whoever that person was. Good Lord, how fast was he, she going? It's one of the fun things about meditating here. You just get so much to respond to with the traffic going by. So a little boy decides he wants to skip school. So he calls the elementary school and trying to fake a deeper voice. He says to the person answering the phone, Donald Falk is sick today and can't come to school. And the official answering the phone is like, and she says, to whom am I speaking? And he says, this is my father. Here's another one for you. A state trooper is following this car. It's been speeding for 3-4 miles going down the highway. Finally, he gets the attention of the car. The car pulls over, and there's a woman at the wheel. He said, I had my lights on for the last 3 miles. You've been speeding. You're not even looking in the rearview mirror? Unless you've got a really good story, you're getting a really big ticket. She looks at him and says, Sir, 3 years ago, my husband left me to go and live with the state trooper. I thought you might be bringing him back. So there are some really cute lies out there. Those are some examples of some cute lies. And there are other ways that lies do damage. And tonight, I'd like to talk about what it's like when you're lied to. And how do we heal from the hurt that we receive when we've been lied to or betrayed in some way. I think it's safe to assume that everyone here in some way has been lied to or betrayed at some point. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how do we make peace with our enemies. The title of this talk is Befriending an Enemy. The other title could be Forgive and Remember. So unless we really stop and look closely at our reaction to how our heart has been shut down, we're kind of doomed to stay in that cycle. I'd like to explore tonight, how do we shift out of that cycle? So there are 4 parts to our exploration tonight. The first is a little bit about the whole realm of the heart practices in Buddhist psychology. I'd like to talk about the consequences of keeping your heart closed and how forgiveness can be taken on as a spiritual practice. And then a little bit about what it means to have your heart wide open in the world. What are the skillful means for that? As I was reflecting on just this whole realm of the heart practices and how our lives can transform when we cultivate and open our heart, I ran across this amazing story. And it's the story of a mother whose only child was shot dead by a 16-year-old, and how that 16-year-old now lives next door to her. She lost her son. Her son went to a party and was shot in the head by another kid. And her son was mixed up in drugs, as was this guy. And he was sentenced to 25 and a half years. And he served 17 before he was released. She was overcome with hatred and wanted to see this guy locked up forever. And she decided that she had to do something about it. As she described it, she said she was in shock, disbelief, hatred, anger, blame, more hatred. I wanted him locked up in a cage like the animal that he was. She went to and found a support group where other mothers who had children who were killed, and she was encouraged to try to draw on her faith and explore forgiveness. At some point, she felt compelled to reach out to him, and for about a year, he refused contact. Finally, he agreed, and she met with him, and the first thing she said was, you don't know me, I don't know you, let's start with right now. And as he says now, he was completely befuddled. They met regularly after that, and when he was released from prison about 18 months ago, she introduced him to her landlord, and with his blessing, moved into the building. So now they're close friends, and she says that she actually has a selfish mode here. She said, unforgiveness is like a cancer. It will eat you from the inside out. It's not about that other person. Me forgiving him does not diminish what he's done. Yes, he murdered my son, but the forgiveness is for me. And she wears a necklace with a two-sided locket. One side is a photo of her son. The other is the side of her neighbor, who she's kind of adopted. And he says in this interview, I haven't forgiven myself yet. I'm learning, and I'm growing toward trying to forgive myself. And he hopes to prove to the mother of this boy that he killed by giving back to society. They visit prisons and churches to talk about forgiveness and reconciliation, and they often go together to give these talks. I don't know about you, but trying to imagine forgiving someone is like that is so extraordinary. And this really brings us to the two fundamental wings of this practice. One being the wing of wisdom, just to recognize what's true. And the second wing is to, in some way, find a way to open ourselves to compassion. Compassion for ourselves and compassion for others. When we can do that, we open up new possibilities where they didn't exist before. So I'm just back from a week-long retreat. We had over 100 churning and burning yogis, and it was quite a transformational event. On my part, as one of the leaders, we have small groups, and we also meet individually with people through the course of the week. And Tara and I were talking about this, and one of the most touching things in serving a retreat where everyone is in silence and practicing so intensively is the self-honesty that people have, to really name what's there. There's that wonderful story of this great teacher, And it was a renowned teacher. People would have to walk through the wilderness for 2 days to get to this teacher. And he would say, I'm going to ask you one question, but you can't tell anyone what the question is. And the question he would ask is, what are you not willing to feel? And they would take that question and walk for 2 days back. So there's something about this practice when you bring yourself to cultivate wisdom. What is actually happening here? What is there that I'm not willing to feel that I might relax and open to? And the other part is, can I be with this? Can I allow this to flow? Can I allow this to let go? So it takes incredible courage to name what's between you and feeling free, and then to actually investigate it. So as I was exploring this topic of forgive and remember, there's a lot of stuff out there on what it's like to have your heart closed. You may have noticed. Just Google famous feuds, and there's some great reading out there. So I learned something about the Hatfield-McCoys. Harmon McCoy joined the 45th Kentucky Infantry on October 20th, 1863. He was captured, released to a Union hospital, and his unit shot and wounded a guy named Christian Klein, who was a friend of Anse Hatfield. Klein lived, but Hatfield vowed to retaliate. And William Francis, who was a member of his unit, was killed as he left his house, and Hatfield took credit for it. Someone on the other side was killed, and the McCoy family points out who it was, Jim Vance, and then that simmered for a number of years. And then there was a dispute as to the ownership of a hog. Floyd Hatfield, who was a cousin of Anse, had the hog, and Ralph McCoy said it was his. They took it to a local justice of the peace, who was a Hatfield, and he ruled for the Hatfields. And then it began, killing after killing after killing. At one point, a McCoy fell in love with a Hatfield, which could have been good news. But then he left her for someone else. And then it got really violent, and some atrocious violence with this hatred that was fueled between these two clans. Some really, really gruesome murders. So about 25 people in these two families were either murdered or severely wounded. And finally, in 1979, it all healed when they did a special week's taping of the game show Family Feud with the Hatfield-McCoy descendants. And they issued a statement saying, we're not saying you don't have to fight, because sometimes you have to fight, but you don't have to fight forever. So a little reflection, if you like, if you can close your eyes. You might just take a few moments to reflect on someone you might have a grudge against. Just take a few moments to go through the files and just kind of pull one up. Someone you haven't completely let go. And as you settle in on one, just as a little experiment here for just another minute or so, when you think about this grudge or the lack of forgiving, can you sense what that feels like inside? Can you locate that feeling of unforgiven or the grudge? And you might even exaggerate a little bit, kind of let it get big. If you were to take that feeling and put it as an expression on your face, what would that be like? And as you exaggerate this, you might ask, what would it be like to hold on to this forever? Just to say hello to that. And you can let that go and deepen the breath. If you like, you can open your eyes, or feel free to remain with them closed. The foundations of Buddhist psychology are built on four main insights or teachings. The first being that stress and suffering are part of life. It happens. The second, that wherever there is stress and suffering, there's a cause. And the cause is tied into holding on, attachment, clinging. So anywhere there's any kind of tightness inside, there's something holding on, some form of identification. The third insight or principle is that you can let go. It's the release of the cessation of stress or suffering. It's possible to let go. And the fourth is that there is a path. There are techniques, there are teachings, there are ways of turning your attention that will assist you dramatically in this process of letting go. And so we see pretty clearly into the nature of karma, that for every action there's an equal reaction. When we hold on to something that is holding us back from feeling free, we perpetuate that. When we can't break out of that, it controls us in some way. I ran across the story of Hiru Onada, who was a Japanese soldier in the Philippines in World War II. And he was told by his commander, "You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5. Whatever happens will come back for you. As long as you have one soldier, you are to continue to lead him." Onada spent 29 years in the jungles of the Philippines. Didn't know that the war was over. A few people, one person in his group of 4 snuck away and was told the war was over and tried to leave a note for him, and he and his comrades thought it was propaganda. Eventually another person was shot and killed, another one left and disappeared, but finally 29 years later, a Japanese student decided to try to find him because there were some sightings. And he went into the jungles, became friends with him, but he would not come out until his commander told him it was okay. And his commander was still alive. He gave him the order and he came out. There's something about that story. 29 years of believing the war was still going on. And when we think of the consequences of holding on to our hurts, not being able to let go, we live our lives with that clench inside. Unless we can reboot our system, we're doomed to just play out those patterns and those cycles. So the question becomes, how do we reboot our system? And this is about the practice of forgiveness. How to explore forgiveness as a spiritual practice. When this woman, Mary Johnson, spoke to her landlord around her son's killer having a space to rebuild his life, what did it take for her to do that? that act of generosity, what possibly could have allowed her to open her heart that big? There's a classic story that Tara often tells that speaks to truly what it takes. And that's the story which I've shared before. Imagine you're walking in the park and you see a cute little puppy. And you go down to pet the puppy. And just as you're bending over, the puppy lunges at you and tries to bite you. You jump back. Your relationship to the puppy is dramatically changed. And then you look closer and you see that the puppy's leg is caught in a trap. Again, your relationship to that puppy has changed. It's suffering, its leg is caught in a trap. Suddenly your heart can open again. What's required in the practice of forgiveness is to really get how the other person's leg is caught in a trap. And to really get how your leg is caught in a trap as well. When you explore forgiveness of self and forgiveness of other. It is the practice of the role reversal. Our capacity to sense or imagine or feel what another person is feeling. When you can do that, things begin to shift. So there are a number of strategies for forgiveness through the Buddhist lens. Classically, you begin by asking forgiveness for yourself, which never made sense to me, in particular when I was exploring those who had hurt me. I thought, what work do I have to do? That's the jerk who did this to me. But what the Buddha pointed out was how when we do violence to others, we do it on 3 levels, from the very, very subtle to the gross. The most subtle is our thoughts, having violent thoughts toward others, judgmental thoughts, aversive thoughts. Certainly, I was aware of that in how I was holding the experience. How many aversive, negative, mean, spiteful thoughts did I hold and harbor toward this other person? The second is your speech, the harmful speech that you do toward another. And how many times had I spoken poorly of the other? The third, which is the grossest level, are your actions. So when you begin to explore the intention to forgive yourself for the harm you may have caused another, it's very important to reflect on your thoughts, your speech, and your actions. And to take a certain degree of recognition of that and responsibility for that. So we begin with ourselves. And we reflect on the harm that we have done the other out of our own reactivity. And only then do we begin to explore offering forgiveness to another. Now, there are a number of things about the forgiveness practice. There's been a lot of study on kind of this science of forgiveness. One is that it's not fast. It doesn't seem to happen like that. But it requires that you incline your mind toward that intention to forgive and to let go. The other is that forgiveness does not mean that you condone the other's activity. And that's a very important thing. I lived in the spiritual community for many, many years, gave many, many years of my life there and with great fervor and great sincerity. And like many of the big ashrams in the West, it fell apart. And it fell apart in part to the lack of integrity of the leadership. There were a number of breaches of trust on many, many different levels. And as a result, the entire community collapsed. I had intended to live my life in this community, and to see it all crumble and fall apart was quite a shock. And as I explored forgiveness toward my teacher, I had a kind of a fascinating insight when I realized whoever said forgive and forget completely had it wrong. It's forgive and remember. It's possible to forgive someone and never allow that activity to happen again. It's possible to forgive someone and absolutely ensure that what they did will not be repeated. And that was very, very helpful for me. So I'd like to share with you a forgiveness prayer, which is, it's not the classical prayer. It is sort of an updated version from a teacher named Eric Kolvig. And it has kind of a softer quality to it that I think is a little bit more accessible. So I'll share with you these phrases and give you some time just to reflect on them. And again, part of the forgiveness practice is just holding the intention. It's kind of at the same time, can be a cathartic process. When you explore the intention to forgive, it may bring up strong emotions. It may bring up strong hurts. That's part of the purpose of it. Just as when you meditate with the intention to be present, you'll notice how you're not present. And when you meditate with the intention to generate compassion for other beings, you'll begin to notice how petty you are. When you have the intention to forgive, you will notice where the tightness is. So if you find resistance in this practice, it's working. I've shared this story many, many times, but on a month-long retreat where we were doing heart practices, and the final week was the forgiveness practice, and there was someone who I was very, very clear who I was supposed to be working on. And so every day for an hour, intensively working toward forgiveness. And I had my interview that week with Jack Kornfield. And I said, well, here's where I am on the forgiveness practice. I can absolutely forgive this guy as long as I'm guaranteed that I'll burn in hell for eternity. Which I thought was great progress. And as I stayed with it, I did have a softening. And again, it sort of melted into the role reversal. And I could just see, oh, I get it. I get how frightened he was. And as a result, he took these actions which harmed me. And that was the beginning of the softening. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And as you select someone to explore for this, you might want to choose someone you have sort of a medium grudge against. Maybe not your arch nemesis, but just to kind of get a sense of how the technology works. And it's also helpful just to really make this as specific as you can. And if you can't think of anyone, you can make someone up. So taking a few moments just to reflect on someone with whom you feel some separation. Someone you feel you have a grudge toward or something unforgiven. And if you need a little more time, just raise your hand. So you might just take a few moments to sense this other person. Some of us are visual, so you might like to bring up a visual image, either a still image or maybe a little video, a clip. Some of us are more auditory. You might recall a conversation or a tone of voice or any sounds. And it can be helpful to reflect on the kinesthetic as to what does it feel like inside as you think of this person. And we'll explore 3 sets of words. The first is contemplating extending forgiveness to yourself. I allow myself to be imperfect. I allow myself to make mistakes. I allow myself to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. I forgive myself. If I cannot forgive myself now, may I forgive myself sometime in the future. As you reflect on offering forgiveness to yourself, if you could forgive yourself, what would that feel like? What would that be like inside? The second set concerns asking forgiveness from the other for the harm that you've done to them. Please allow me to be imperfect. Please allow me to make mistakes. Please allow me to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. Please forgive me. If you cannot forgive me now, please try to forgive me sometime in the future. And you might reflect, if you were forgiven, what would that feel like? What would that be like inside? Extending forgiveness to those who have harmed you. Just as I allow myself to be imperfect, so I allow you to be imperfect. I allow you also to make mistakes. I allow you to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. I forgive you. If I cannot forgive you now, may I forgive you sometime in the future. And reflecting, if you could forgive this person, what would that be like? What would that feel like inside? And letting this fall away. And reflecting on your intention to free your heart. You can let your eyes open or feel free to remain with them closed. Our brains are evolving. We know the reptilian brain, growing over the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, which is about family, tribe, relationship, emotion. And then here's this prefrontal cortex, which has to do with awareness, has to do with self-awareness. It has to do with wisdom. It has to do with seeing the consequences of our actions. And it has to do with awareness of others. The more you relax and pay attention, the more sensitive you become. And thereby, the more sensitive you become to others. And the more you will find certain things less and less tolerable. Inevitably, the old hurts, the old wounds, whatever is between you and feeling free, feeling happy, begin to come to the surface. And we begin to recognize that forgiveness is this incredible tool for freedom. As the Buddha said, when you're angry, it's like you are picking up a hot coal to throw at the other person, and you forget that you're the one who's being burned. When we begin to recognize that we can free the heart, we can free our consciousness, it can be pretty exciting. There's so many wonderful stories of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama, and all these leaders who experienced and represented truly besieged groups of populations. And to see how they, in the midst of suffering, how they were able to transmute their own heart. Really quite extraordinary. Gandhi said that nonviolence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. It's mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by the ingenuity of man. There's a great story I'd heard. It was a directive to British officers not to have tea with Gandhi and not to look him in the eye. And because he would constantly be wanting to invite a British officer in for tea. And because he was so aware of the other and so compassionate, that he was very, very influential. So there was sort of this directive to keep your heart guarded around this guy. We have that potential in us to free the heart. When we look closely through this lens of wisdom, you begin to see into these three characteristics of reality. You begin to see that everything is constantly changing. You begin to see that your relationship to what is changing determines how you suffer. If you try to control it, you're going to get rope burn. If you can let go, it can flow. And you begin to see into your true nature. That you're the product of causes and conditions, and that there's a quality of awareness which can open to limitless space. And you also get to free the heart. And you get to touch into what is described in Pali as the Brahma Viharas. And these are literally the heavenly abodes. And they're qualities of the heart that are described as immeasurable. There are four particular qualities that are the fruit of your practice as your heart becomes more purified. And that is you get more access to kindness. Spontaneous kindness toward yourself and others. You have more access to compassion, the capacity to feel what's inside, to feel others. Your capacity for joy. Not just your own joy, but mudita is described as sympathetic joy. To take spontaneous joy at the joy of others. And this quality of equanimity, kind of a steadiness that emerges no matter what the fluctuations of your life. So these are the qualities that arise through the heart. I thought we might close with a short little reflection on these qualities. So letting your eyes close and deepening the breath. You might take a moment to relax and feel. acknowledging this capacity for wisdom, your capacity to see clearly. And sensing just in these few minutes together, your capacity for kindness. And as you breathe, you might just reflect on either your capacity for kindness or your willingness to open your capacity for kindness for yourself and for others. Your willingness to open, expand your capacity for compassion for yourself and for others. Sensing your willingness to increase and expand your capacity for joy for yourself and for others. And your capacity to increase this quality of steadiness, no matter what the fluctuations of your life, a quality of being, a steady quality of presence. And you might take in these final moments just to reflect on anyone in your life who may be struggling right now, going through a hard time. You might extend to them these qualities of kindness, compassion, joy, and presence. And deepening the breath. And as you're ready, you can let your eyes open. Thanks for your kind attention tonight. May you and your forgiving heart have a wonderful evening together. A few quick announcements. Just a reminder that there's awesome yoga at 6:30. If you'd like to be on the mailing list, you can sign up in the back. Thank you as always for your generous support for the church and for myself. And one thing the heart loves more than anything is a good cookie. So that's waiting for you out in the lobby as well. Thank you again. Have a great evening.